Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sackur. The outside world tends to view Scandinavia as a haven of prosperity, progressive politics, and social liberalism. But look closer, and you find a powerful strand of right-wing populism fueled by suspicion of immigration. My guest is Siv Jensen, Finance Minister and the leader of the right-wing Progress Party in Norway, a partner in the coalition government there for the past 5 years. How does populism work in a country rated one of the world's richest and happiest? Siv Jensen, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you very much.
I guess labels are inevitable in politics, and I just described your party, the Progress Party in Norway, as right-wing and populist. Do you accept that label?
No. The Progress Party is not a populist party. It's a libertarian party. We focus on free trade, market orientation, lower taxes, less state, individual freedom.
I know that is the origin of your party, but it seems to me in recent years, increasingly you and your party have homed in a populist fashion, on the issue of immigration.
Well, now, immigration is, of course, an important issue to my party, as it is in many countries in Europe. And that has to do with the fact that we have seen a lot of migration, and to some extent it has been damaging into many countries' economies. So what we have done in Norway is that we have...
well, it hasn't been damaging to your economy. You've got one of the, if not the strongest economy in Europe.
Yes, for the time being it's boosting, it's doing well. But you have to remember that our economy was hit by the oil price shock back in 2014. That affected us very much, and at the same time we had the flow of migration also to Norway, which meant that we had to tighten the immigration policy, and now we have control, so we have less people coming into Norway than before, which means that we can concentrate on integration, which is of course very important to secure our economic growth in the future.
Yeah, but in that sense, I mean, you acknowledge with me that yes, immigration has been a key plank of your platform over the last few years.
Very important part of our policy.
Very important part of your platform. I mean, in that way, commentators both in Norway and beyond Norway do see links between the strength of your party and the rise of people like Marine Le Pen in France, the AFD in Germany, which are hitting the same hot buttons when it comes to playing upon people's fears of immigration.
Well, we don't play on people's fears. We talk about the obvious, that we need to have control on our borders and that we need to make sure that we have a better integration policy, because it means that when people arrive in Norway, when they are supposed to live there maybe for the rest of their lives, they need to learn the language, they need to get a job, they need to provide for themselves and their family. I think that's quite obvious, and that's not scary talk.
Well, if you don't play upon people's fears, why did you refer just a few years back to the, quote, sneaking Islamization of European society?
Because it's true. It is a debate that
Islamization of European society?
Well, this is a debate that goes everywhere, but I disagree with your way of putting label on my party. We are a libertarian party, but also concerned about immigration, and that's why we are tightening the policy, and it works in Norway.
And
so we're happy
if
with
you
that.
reject not just the label of populist, but if you reject my notion that you play upon people's fears, how did you respond when your party colleague Sylvi Listhaug, who recently resigned as Minister of Justice, when she was a minister in the coalition before and she was immigration minister, she said this: "We are fully aware that there are wolves in sheep's clothing," she said, talking directly about immigration. "Fundamentalists who hate our Norwegian system are coming to exploit our boundless Norwegian naivety." And you say you don't play upon people's fears?
Yes, I think this is something that takes part in the public debate every day. It's something that we need to address, and that is why we have taken this seriously.
So you too, like your colleagues, see immigrants as wolves in sheep's clothing?
No, I think basically the majority of immigrants living in Norway are behaving very well. They are well integrated, they go to work every day, they know their language and they take part of the Norwegian society. What we need to avoid is that people are not integrated. And we do have our fair share of that as well, which is an increasing problem, especially if we want to make sure that we have sustainable economic growth also in the future.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to economic growth and how to sustain it, because you are, after all, finance minister.
Yes,
but you're leader of the Progress Party, so I need to stick with the immigration debate for a bit longer, because it is so important, not just in your country, but around Europe.
And just here as well, in the UK.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just remind me, when you talk of sneaky Islamization, just remind me, what percentage of Norway's population is Muslim?
I really don't know.
Well, it's roughly 4%.
But the point.
But how can that be Islamization when 4%, 1 in 25 of your people are actually Muslim?
It's actually something that is of great concern to many of us around the world. We've had increasing problems with radical Islam. Many of us are actually taking part in controlling the IS in Syria. So this is an increasing problem, and some of these people are returning back to their original country, representing a threat to us. And I think this is something that we need to take seriously.
We're talking about Norway. We're not talking about Syria. We're talking about 200,000 or so people who are Muslim. Are you suggesting to me that you see them as fundamentally a security threat, a threat within your midst in Norway?
We have never said that all Muslims...
So what is this wolf in sheep's clothing thing?
We have never said that all Muslims are a threat to the Norwegian society. What we have been addressing is radical Islam as an increasing problem to our society and to the Western world. And I think this is something that we need to take seriously. And to be very clear, if we politicians do not take part in this debate, I think that's more dangerous, actually, if we don't debate it.
Well, debate has to be had, I'm sure. This is your contribution. This was on Facebook, actually, more than a year ago. You talked about integration, which you say is very important. You say, we have a big challenge now to integrate those who have permission to stay in Norway. We have to ensure they respect Norwegian values. And then you go on, it is not allowed to beat your children in Norway. Here we eat pork, we drink alcohol, we show our faces, and you must abide by these values, laws and regulations when you are in Norway. Are you suggesting that Muslims in your country have a proclivity for beating children?
What we are addressing are issues that people talk about in the public life. We have discussions on many of these issues every day.
Do you believe Muslims beat their children in a way that other cultures do not?
No, I don't believe that.
So why the reference to beating children?
The point is that we want to make sure that everyone that wants to live in Norway lives by a certain set of standards, that we can face each other, that we can talk to each other, that we can help each other, and that we can take part in the same society. This is the basic
tone,
rules.
isn't it? It is tone. I mean, I am sure, without a doubt, you do not believe that Norwegians are required to eat pork or drink alcohol. But again, why lay out those things as fundamental Norwegian values when you know that the signal you're sending is that somehow Muslims, who of course don't eat pork and many of them don't drink alcohol, can't be proper Norwegians?
We have been very, very clear on as I said, that not all Muslims are a problem at all. As I said, most Muslims living in Norway are behaving very well integrated, and we know that they contribute a lot to our society. But I still believe it is important for us to address issues concerning immigration, concerning radical Islam, and we will continue to do so. I
believe your party, the Progress Party, is pushing for a ban on the full-face veil, not just in places of education, but in all public spaces across Norway.
That's my party's stand, but the government has now put forward a proposition that concerns the education place,
yes,
and kindergarten.
And you want to go further, just as you want to tighten up even further the immigration
That's my party's stand, yes. But we're very, very happy that we are now launching these changes that we are actually talking about.
I just wonder whether it gives you pause for thought when you see the latest Oslo police report recording a very serious, significant increase in the number of reported hate crimes. They've increased a great deal, and the police say the biggest increase we see is amongst women being insulted in the category of religion, and most specifically Islam. I just wonder whether you might see a link there between your party's preoccupation with banning the full-face veil and the fact that there is a very significant rise in hate crimes directed at Muslim women.
Well, first of all, let me say that hate crime is not acceptable at all. And I think that it's very good that the police is reporting on this and that they do something about it. And I think all Norwegians should be very, very careful about this, because hate crime is not acceptable whatsoever.
You've had a bit of a political crisis in your party and in the coalition in recent months concerning a woman that I'd already mentioned, Sylvi Listhaug, who was the Minister of Justice, and she, as I understand it, was pushing for legislation that would give the authorities in Norway the right to strip individuals suspected of terrorism or being associated in some way with jihadism, strip them of their rights to Norwegian citizenship without any judicial oversight or review. Now, the Labour Party, the opposition, opposed her plan. She then posted on Facebook a picture of masked men in military fatigues with ammunition and weapons. And she said this: Labour thinks terrorist rights are more important than our nation's security. Please like and share. What did you make of that?
First of all, I'm very glad that she apologized for putting that post on Facebook, because it was over the top. That said, the proposal that we referred to was the government's proposal that did not pass Parliament.
No, because Labour wouldn't accept it.
Well, Labour has not the ability to join majority by themselves, but it didn't pass Parliament. And we have to accept
democracy.
that. Yes, it is.
And she decided that because Labour took, as far as they were concerned, a principled stand against a piece of legislation that they frankly viewed as an abuse of constitutional values in Norway. This colleague of yours in your party basically said that Labour was siding with terrorists.
Now, first of all, the proposal...
Well, that's true, isn't it?
The proposal that you refer to was the government's proposal, but the post that she put out on Facebook, she apologized for, and I'm glad she did, because it was over the top.
Do you believe that your party has room for people like her in it?
Yes, I do.
So an apology is fine. The fact that she... There's something sensitive here, and many of our viewers and listeners might not remember, but in 2011, a terrorist, a Norwegian terrorist, attacked a youth camp, a Labour Party youth camp, and killed dozens of young people.
Yes.
So the Labour Party is particularly sensitive to accusations that it is the terrorist's friend and betraying Norwegian values. So I'm just wondering what she would have to have said for you to say to her, you're no longer acceptable in my party.
First of all, the terrorist attack that hit Norway was terrible, and the government has spent a lot of time securing our society after that event. I think that's been very, very important for us to do. Secondly, I think it's a good thing for any politician, if you go wrong, if you say something that you shouldn't, that you have the ability to apologize for it. I think that is actually something that more politicians should do, and I'm glad she did. So that's why we have moved on, but she resigned, and a new Minister of Justice was actually appointed yesterday.
Okay, just one more word on this and I want to move on. Can you see her coming back into the Norwegian government?
Yes, in the future I can. Yes, I can.
Let's move on.
She's actually a very, very good politician with a brilliant future ahead of her.
Let's talk about Norway and the EU. There's much discussion of it because you are not in the European Union, but you're in the European Economic Area, which gives you, of course, full access to the single market, customs union, all of that. But it comes at a price because you have to pay into the EU and you have to abide, I think it's by roughly 3/4 of EU rules and regulations. So a fundamental part of your economy is actually governed from Brussels. Do you, in the Progress Party, think that is a sustainable status quo for Norway?
Well, the Progress Party is in favour of the EEA agreements, but we're against us moving towards being a member of the EU. We've had 2 referendums in Norway, and both times the majority of the population said no to joining the EU. But I think the EEA agreement has very broad support in Norway, because we are The European market is the most important market to Norway.
But isn't it fundamentally anti-democratic? Because many of the rules and regulations and laws that govern the way certainly the Norwegian economy works are made in Brussels, and you have no voice whatsoever in setting those rules and regulations.
Well, it's true that our voice is weaker than it had been if we sat at the table. But I think, that said, we have more flexibility without being a member than if we were a member. But the EEA agreement has a lot of support in Norway, also in the parliament. Huge majority is in favor of it. It serves us well, especially since it gives us access to the single market, which is very important to a small open economy like the Norwegian one.
Yeah, well, it's interesting in Britain to look at Norway because we of course took a decision through a referendum to pursue the track of Brexit.
Yes.
And Brexit is going to happen according to the government. Now, there is discussion about whether we should pursue the Norway model. This is what your Prime Minister, Erna Solberg, said. She said, be careful, because our type of connection with the EU is going to be difficult for Britain because then Brussels will decide without the Brits being able to participate in the decision-making process. From your perspective, you just said we're a small country. Do you think for Britain the kind of deal that you have with the EU would be appropriate?
I don't think I should give advice on how Brexit, the results of Brexit should be for UK. This is something that you have to negotiate with the EU side and find your solution to it. I think our experience with the agreement since 1994 has been very good. There is, of course, from time to time we have a debate also in our country on making certain changes to the agreement and so forth, but the overall picture is that it serves us very well.
It'd be a big problem for you if Britain does what some call the hard Brexit, that is, leave the EU ultimately without a full-fledged trade deal and without agreeing to participate in the single market and the customs union. In that case, Norway, which has Britain as its biggest trading partner, would be in a very difficult place, wouldn't it?
Let me say that the bilateral relationship between Norway and the UK is excellent, and it will be, no matter what happens with the Brexit deal.
Well, you don't quite know that, because you don't know what the trading relationship between the UK and the EU will be, and as you're part of the European Economic Area, you're governed by what the EU decides to do.
Yeah, of course, we follow the ongoing negotiations from the side with interests, of course. But I think the Norwegian relationship with the EU side will not change with Brexit, and our relationship to the UK will not change, except the fact that we need to make some formalities through legislation. We need to have more bilateral agreements between the two countries and so forth, but I'm very, very sure that we will be able to sit down and negotiate that.
What if Britain gets a more favourable deal with the EU than you've got, i.e. Britain perhaps is required to pay in less, or Britain has more freedom to operate outside the rules of the EU than you do, and yet gets the advantages, most at least of the advantages of frictionless trade with the European Union? Would that move Norway to want to renegotiate its own deal with the European Union?
I think this is not the time to speculate in that. I think first we will have to see the outcome of the ongoing negotiations. But I can say that we are very happy with the agreement that we have, because it serves us well. And then we are concerned with solving the aftermaths that needs to be resolved between us bilaterally after Brexit. And I'm sure that we are perfectly able to do so. We have already started the discussions
Your former
with
European
the UK
Affairs Minister said hard Brexit will affect Norway dramatically, as dramatically as any EU member state. I mean, there is a sense of alarm building in Norway, is there not?
I think what we need to do is to we need to just accept the outcome of the negotiations between UK and the EU. That's nothing that we can do anything about, but I think that this can be resolved, and I'm sure that there will be a good result when it comes when we see the results in the end.
Before we end, I would like to ask you something else. Directly responsible you are as finance minister for overseeing in government the sovereign wealth fund, the massive $1 trillion oil fund that Norway has developed and nurtured over many years. Last year was pretty unusual because I think it was the first year that actually your outflows from the fund exceeded the new money coming into the fund. Now, your opponents in Norway say that there's profligacy in the finance ministry, that you're overspending this very important, valuable legacy for Norway's children's futures.
Well, that's not entirely correct. We have a 3% spending rule that we have been way below ever since we took office. But it is true, for the last couple of years, we've had an expansionary fiscal policy to get us through the aftermath of the drop in oil prices. Now we see our economy picking up. Growth is above trend already this year and also next year. Unemployment has come down. Employment is increasing. So all figures show that it has been good for us.
Well, the leader of the opposition Labour Party says it's a result, this what he calls profligacy, is a result of a right-wing populist party in government. They've overspent our children's savings while giving tax cuts to the wealthy Norwegians living today.
He also lost the elections, but let me say, the fund is growing. The fund is growing every year. It's getting bigger and bigger, and we put aside a lot of money for future generations at the same time as we invest in future growth today by lowering taxes, by investing in infrastructure, by investing in research and development and education. I think those are the most important areas to invest in, and we do that within the sound framework of the spending rule of the fund.
Norway's wealth is built on amazing reserves of oil and gas. It is very striking, therefore, that many in your country are now talking about the need to divest the sovereign wealth fund from investments in oil and gas. Do you favour that?
Well, we just had a proposition that we are considering for the time being, but I think...
Do you favour it? You're the finance minister. It's rather important to know what you think.
But we are looking into that now, and we have not made any decision on that. But what we do is we already diversify the fund. Remember, the fund is invested globally. It's a diversified fund. We are in several thousand companies globally in many different areas, and that's how we need to invest the fund.
I suppose it raises a question, though. Norway, built on oil and gas to a certain extent, in the long run, the world economy is trying to decarbonise. It's trying to wean itself off fossil fuels. Does that, in the long term, present a fundamental challenge for Norway? No,
and I think Norway will continue to be an oil and gas producer for many, many decades ahead. Yes, we will.
You say that happily? Even though the world is committed to decarbonisation.
But we also need to reorientate our economy. We need to invest broader, not because we experienced very, very clearly what could happen after the oil price dropped in 2014, that we needed to diversify our economy, and that's what we're doing for the time being. But we will still be an oil and gas producer for decades to come, but at a lower speed than we have been for the decades behind us. And we have known this for a long time, but this is an important industry to Norway, and we are proud of it. And it's also producing with quite well, I would say.
All right, Siv Jensen, we have to end there, but thank you very much indeed for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you very much indeed.